The recent TT120 announcements from Peco and Hornby may have gone unnoticed by many modelers who have no interest in switching to a different scale in the immediate future. The launch is not without consequence, however, for any Hornby customer. Does the introduction of this scale make sense right now, and what are the consequences of this move by Hornby in particular? It's time to take a closer look. Hi, thanks for joining today's video. As with my video on factory weathering earlier this year, I'm going to employ some virtual contributors to put forward some varying thoughts on the TT120 introduction. Before we get into my thoughts, I want to do a quick review of the relative footprints of OO scale, TT120 and N scale, so that we're clear about what we're talking about in terms of how much space an equivalent TT120 layout will take up compared to the other two. We'll then get into my other thoughts on the topic, including some of the consequences of this introduction that I haven't seen covered yet in any other videos on this topic. Whether you were interested in TT120 or not, Hornby's TT120 introduction has had and will continue to have broader consequences, so we need to talk about those. Finally, I want to get your feedback on TT120 by way of a quick survey, so we'll talk about that at the end. Okay, sit back and let's listen to some differing opinions on this topic for the next few minutes.
I've been working with my local men's shed to build a 3mm model of our local railway. We've invested many man-years of effort in the project, building model kits, recreating part of the local town and countryside to scale, even down to painting figures and installing lighting. Now I see Hornby have gone for a 2.5mm scale. I'm concerned that the existing 3mm community will be divided, and that support for 3mm will wane. Why have Hornby rejected their original tabletop scale? And also rejected the 3mm community like this? It's a land grab if you ask me, a vanity project for Mr. Cola. But there's no way we're going to bow to them. We'll stick to 3mm if we can. If we see it's going to be a non-runner in the long term, we'll move to N-gauge instead, and be done with it. I'm never buying Hornby again, they're a disgrace.
As a 00 gauge modeler, I don't see much relevance for me in the recent Hornby TT120 announcement. I'm very happy with 00 gauge. It gives me all the detail and features I want, and it has probably the best range of models of any of the different scales that are out there, at least for a UK modeler. TT120 is so new, it will take years to catch up, even if it is very successful. Also, I would be concerned that Hornby are currently the only one of the mainstream UK manufacturers supporting it. Anyway, it's not for me at the moment, and I'm very happy where I am.
We moved to England 2 years ago when I was little. All my friends at school here have Hornby trains, and I've asked my parents if Santa would be able to get me a Hornby train for Christmas. They told me then Santa would only bring me a Hornby train, if I had enough room for it. My dad has told me I don't, as we are living in a small apartment. But now that Hornby are making smaller trains, my parents have told me that Santa will be able to bring me a Hornby train for Christmas after all. I love you, Hornby!
Since my son Keegan started going to school here in England, he has forever been talking about Hornby trains, and whether Santa would bring him one for Christmas. Unfortunately, we just wouldn't have had the room for it up to now, as we live in a relatively small apartment, compared to what we had in the US. With Hornby bringing out new smaller trains in the coming months, I think we can accommodate it now. Keegan is so pleased, and can't wait to get his first Hornby TT120 train. Thank you, Hornby!
I switched to N-gauge a few years ago due to space constraints. Looking through Hornby's TT120 announcement, I don't see anything there for me. It's still not a small enough scale to meet my needs, and it will have nothing like the multi-vendor support I have with N-gauge. I have no shortage of models to choose from, and a healthy pre-owned market to tap into as well. Even if I was making the shift to a smaller scale today, I wouldn't see TT120 as an option for me.
I've been a 00 gauge modeler for as long as I can remember, and have a reasonably large layout in my attic. Now that I'm retired and looking to downsize to a smaller home, I just won't have the space for the layout I currently have. Up until now, N gauge looked like the only real mainstream option, but I felt it was just too small for my needs. I had looked into 3mm scale, but without a major mainstream UK manufacturer, I didn't feel it had enough support. The new TT120 scale looks like the perfect option for me. It will give me the space reduction I need, and will still be a large enough scale for me given my eyesight isn't what it used to be. It looks like the best option out there now. And with Hornby and Peco behind it, how can I go wrong?
As a model shop owner, I'm not very pleased about Hornby's TT120 announcement, and the fact that I won't be able to sell it in my shop. Even if I was able to sell it, it would have been an added overhead for me in terms of inventory and keeping up with the new range. But at least I would have been able to make some money from it. I have to believe that TT120 sales are going to impact my existing Hornby sales, so my overall business is likely to shrink now. The more successful TT120 is, the more of an impact it is going to have on my business. Did we really need another scale in the UK? Or are Hornby using this as a way to freeze out retailers like myself and maximize their profits? I'm not happy with Hornby right now.
As a model manufacturer, the TT120 2.5mm scale is not something we have planned to invest in at this point in time. We are not convinced there is currently a sufficient market for this scale that would justify the investment involved. If this changes in the future, we will certainly re-evaluate our position. For now, we will continue to develop our existing product lines in response to where we see the majority of our customer demand.
So there we've had a variety of views, from the positive to the indifferent to the negative. Pamela and Keegan are very naive and unaware that they could have looked at N-Gauge as a potential option for their space issues. They are new to the modelling world, and with Hornby being the best known brand to the general public and among all of his friends, it became the de facto brand Keegan wanted. Whether the other vendors like it or not, they don't have the brand recognition Hornby have in the broader community, and many entry-level modelers will come through the Hornby door first rather than through any of the other players. William is making a more considered choice, but may need a prescription change, as his glasses appear to be very rose-coloured, and he misses the point Beatrice makes in her segment on the lack of cross-vendor support. I don't think the model shop owner's view would be a surprise to anyone. TT120 will undoubtedly cannibalise 00 gauge retail sales, particularly for new entrants. We'll come to this later. That brings us to Arthur, who never fails to disappoint. I have to suspect there are a number of Arthurs out there with respect to this topic, and while they mightn't be as strident in their condemnation, they aren't happy campers and can't be blamed for feeling a bit let down by Hornby. So before we go any further, let's look at one of the key selling points that Hornby is putting forward with regard to TT120, and that is that of the reduced space requirements. Let's start with what is probably the smallest baseboard size for a viable 00 scale layout, that of 6 foot by 4 foot. It can just about accommodate a radius 4 circuit within its boundaries, so realistically you could have 3 circuits, one each of radius 4, 3 and 2 on the layout. I'm discounting radius 1, which is no longer supported by most new model releases. Due to its physical size, the baseboard is going to need some form of wooden underframe to avoid bowing, and at 6 foot in length it will not generally fit under most beds. It's also worth noting that while we're talking about 00 scale models, the track here is actually HO gauge. The track is physically narrower than it should be for a proper 00 scale model. Let's add TT120 into the mix now, showing here in red. Again, we have a radius 4 and radius 3 circuit. The reduced space requirement is significant, as the same level of track coverage can now be accommodated within a 4 foot by 3 foot baseboard. This can easily be stored under a bed, which is the requirement Keegan's parents had before getting a train set for him. Finally, let's add in N-scale, which is in blue. Again, we are showing radius 4 and radius 3 circuits. With this image, you could be forgiven for thinking that the difference between TT120 and N-scale wasn't that significant. You'd actually be very wrong. On this next view, I'm positioning each scale to help assess the minimum footprint in each case. The grid units are 1 foot by 1 foot, and you can see from this that the N-scale footprint is nearly half that of TT120. And if you drop radius 4 from N-scale, you can fit it into a 3 foot by 2 foot baseboard. Now this is really convenient, and you could even use this as a shelf layout. The message from this should be clear. If space is your paramount concern, then N-scale is where it's at. So that brings us to my own assessment on the TT120 launch. I have to admit at scratching my head when I first saw the original Peco announcement during the summer. Helion announced around the same time, but withdrew once Hornby came on the scene. With Hornby's TT120 announcement, I initially thought we were going to see a shift to this scale from across the other manufacturers, but instead we saw Helion withdraw, and was also made clear by Hornby that sales could only be done via their website. The scale of the Hornby announcement was another thing, and this brought two things into my mind. Does this explain the price gouging we've seen from Hornby over the last few years, as they looked for the funds to invest in their TT120 project? Also, does this explain for the lack of investment by Hornby in many of their existing locomotives, as engineers were busy working on the TT120 project? They've been cranking out deliveries alright on their diesels and electrics, with precious little in terms of real improvements in those products. Now I actually believe TT120 scale and the 3mm TT100 scale, if I call it that, aren't bad scales by any means, and potentially more appealing than N-scale if you don't need the minimalistic space requirements of N-scale. Two other factors come into play here as well, those of model fidelity and running performance. N-scale does appear to be compromised on both of these fronts, whereas TT120 could well be able to hit the mark on these, which could help pave the way for its broader adoption. Given the lack of demonstrable product, my guess is that Hornby's product release days are both vague and optimistic. One of our earlier contributors asked the question whether the UK railway market really needed another scale right now, and given the current financial situation affecting everybody, I'd be asking the same question. Existing modelers are more likely to stay put on the scale that they're on, which leaves you with the new buyers who are most likely to be entry level and which Hornby already owns due to their low cost train sets and railroad range. This will mean a cannibalisation of Hornby's sales in these areas, though they will gain a net benefit from the increased margin from web orders. All of this at the expense of the retailers, of course. The other manufacturers don't have this same entry level presence as Hornby, hence the reason they're not attracted to TT120 right now, as Hornby will be taking the largest slice of that initial pie. I can't see many new experienced modelers taking TT120 over N-scale, though they could pick up people with a heavy layout investment in 3mm that chose to convert. It won't be Arthur, of course. Even if Hornby deliver excellent model fidelity and running performance, they can never hope to deliver the breadth of portfolio that modelers will require for a good number of years and at a significant cost to their OO gauge investments in the meantime. Hornby TT120 could run the risk of going the way of Sony Betamax, an excellent product but with such poor manufacturer support that it ultimately loses out to less worthy options. Unlike Sony Betamax, TT120's competition is already well established and will be extremely challenging to win over. Of course, if Hornby don't deliver the required fidelity and running performance, TT120 will be a dead duck from day one. I think it's safe to say that we all hope that doesn't become the case, and that Hornby make the right decisions along the way, even at the risk of losing some face. Far better to do that than mortgage the farm on something the marketplace either doesn't want or isn't in a position to entertain in the bleak times we currently reside in. The consequence of Hornby's continued aggressive investment in TT120 is likely to be continued high pricing for their OO gauge products and continued lack of investment in their legacy models. So what are your thoughts on TT120 as a scale? Would you consider it if it had enough support? And what are your thoughts on Hornby's current approach to it? Please complete the online survey. It just requires one tick and the link is in the description. And please add your feedback and thoughts on this topic in the comments. So thanks for watching today. Please like, share and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on the next one. In the meantime, happy modelling and take care of yourself.